Or
I've got bad light, or it's doing something to my hair today
yeah.
because I don't have enough light in the office.
So yeah, I have
Where to begin?
some thoughts and ideas as I just shared. I don't know if you have anything um, in mind that feels pressing. Otherwise, I'm happy to jump in.
No, jump in. I'll riff off your um
Yeah.
your
So
opening.
okay. So um, yeah, something that was on my mind and jumped out that I'd seen really recently and was thinking about was the story about the recent uh, murder of the female Olympic athlete, I think in Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the story was, and kind of trigger warning for anybody who's, might be hard to hear about it, but like what happened. But yeah, apparently her partner set her on fire, and she later died of the injuries caused by that. Um,
It was
and
actually Uganda, interestingly, just to correct that.
gotcha.
Because the picture behind me was how beautiful Uganda's country is.
Yeah, so as incredibly disturbing as that is on its own, um, I think part of what came with the story is that this has sort of been, not an uncommon trend in that area. Arguably, probably the world. I'm sure that's not the only place that it's happening, but it's come. It's been more visible because it's these top level world class athletes that are getting murdered by their partners. Um, however, in truth, I'm sure plenty of non-famous people are also getting harmed and killed. And whenever I hear about a story like this, I get sad on two levels, which is I get very sad for the victim and their loved ones.
Mhm.
But then I also get hit with a deeper sadness of just tuning into sort of the energy of that and the state of the world in that regard, and just feeling that collectively there, that energy is present and it's sort of not being effectively pushed back upon, you
Or
know
even or even highlighted enough
or highlighted.
because it's difficult to think about.
Yeah, it's difficult to think about, and also it's difficult because it's such an uncomfortable subject, but also it's difficult to think systemically, period. And the part that's most disturbing to me is that these things are happening, they're likely to continue to happen, and there's nothing being done systemically to address it, to hold these individuals and appropriately accountable, and to prevent future such actions from taking place. And furthermore, that when that is the nature of the culture, even when it's not directly occurring, everyone is aware of it. I'm sure the women of that area, that country, are aware of what happened, and in their mind, it's like, oh wow, if I pursue my dreams, if I put a boundary, if I speak up, you know, that could be me next. And then there's this repression of healthy and important states of being that's just sort of like a silent killer of what is, to me, like what is good in the world, which is into like self-expression. So yeah, that was kind of weighing heavily on me. And
Yes. Well, what comes to my mind is well, in that particular country, there's been a wave of disturbing news items of late. Not I mean, it makes me think of it was just this past year, I believe, they passed some new law in Uganda that made homosexuality of any variation punishable by death. And where it may or may not have been accepted socially, it was brought to that extreme. So it tells me that something's going on in that country or that region around, a huge and dramatic attempt to stop progress, or I don't know, there's probably several words. Stop naturalness, to adhere to ancient religious doctrines that are kind of dominant in the country, and knowing that, like you said, probably a lot of people do not agree with these things and feel traumatized by them, but they're probably feel helpless to do anything to stop those actions or even get justice for such tragedies. So, I mean, in a much broader context, it was interesting. I was listening to something on my dog walk that was talking about the reasons why souls incarnate, and the perhaps complete invisible nature of what could possibly be meaningful in witness to things like that. But like, actually, the first thing that popped into my mind is it just feels like huge disconnection from, divinity and divine source energy or whatever. Like, those examples are people being completely disconnected from, their life force. And
right. Well, and yeah, the way I like to think about that, like, I think sort of whether on a personal level, whether someone agrees or disagrees with a certain idea, let's say homosexuality in this case, whether their personal beliefs dictate that they think that's okay or it's not okay or whatever it is. I think anytime you have a group of people in power that take action to impose their personal and unique view onto the masses, it's extraordinarily problematic.
Yeah.
And results in what you're speaking to, which is that you suppress in people's ability to express themselves authentically, whatever that may look like, because there's always variation and diversity in who people are and what they're here to do and speak and say and all these things. And it's important to have an environment where that is allowable and okay, and where people can disagree with one another. They can be in a way that other people don't understand or agree with, and others don't have the right to take their life away or their freedom away or whatever else because they see it differently. And I like to say it that way because I think it's easy for people to say, oh, if they share that view for some, in some way that I don't agree with homosexuality, then it's easy to not appropriately disagree with that action because they're in alignment with that idea. But it's less, the idea itself is less important than the action of restricting freedom and imposing a viewpoint, because it just as easily could be a viewpoint they feel completely opposite about that could be being imposed on them. But people often overlook that when it happens to be the side that they are in agreement with. And so I try to challenge the idea fundamentally of controlling other people based on your viewpoint.
Well, and so something extremely present for me this last maybe couple weeks, but definitely this week, was had to do with one of the prep calls for my upcoming trip to Egypt. And the conversation was about it's just really been fully immersing my thoughts and my, kind of like my sentient being self. But that's that we're each, if you will, I'll just say that, like, the backdrop would be we each are completely divine and sovereign and have free sovereign reign over our own life, internal life, and certainly we can control what we can control, but there are things that people can never control. I mean, if you look at I'm gonna space his name, who was in prison,
Nelson Mandela.
over apartheid, yeah, for all those years, and never lost himself nor his power or influence, really, which lives on throughout history. So, like, but to me, it's so powerful to keep trying on the deeper levels of what it means to be in touch with the idea that we don't, in our hearts and minds, we don't have to adhere to anyone's voice or anything. People might come and take you down, but they're still not going to win. The truth of that. And it strikes me that how broadly no one's really in touch with their own, whatever you want to call it, God-given power as a human being, a natural, like, powerful being that has independent thoughts, and we're a creation of nature, you know what I mean? And you can't change that. But we've, like, completely removed people's awareness of that. And, like, this, like, I'll bring in the political tanglings thread, because it's like all about, it's often and heavily about getting people through fear to adhere to a common way of being in the world, as opposed to something unimaginable, perhaps now, or broadly now, that we could live far more free in our life expression, and do so in peace, potentially.
Right. Yeah. And actually, I think that that's counter to what a lot of people in power actually want and desire, because, if the majority of people, let's say, of this country, who actually overlap on the majority of important issues to them, if they were able to recognize that consilience and work together and um, elect and identify leadership that supported that and hold that leadership accountable, I really think it could um, lead to a much more uh, prosperous society. And yet, what we continue to see is the polarization, of the narrative on both sides, and there's sort of an almost constant inundation of rhetoric that says you cannot trust the other side. They're trying to destroy everything that you hold dear, and um, and basically it's a black or white choice. You have no choice but to support who we're telling you to support for these reasons. And in my view, what they're actually trying to do is maintain power, by
Yeah.
um by keeping people caught up, in this sort of fear-based, survival-based state, while things actually, in my view, deteriorate in terms of the quality of life of the average American person. While problems that I think could definitely be addressed uh, don't get don't get handled because people are so caught up in this back and forth. And again, I like to try to step back and zoom in on that's not whether I agree or disagree with the specific idea of the person. It's like, to me, I look at the narrative as a whole and the system as a whole. And A, the system's not working clearly, and B, the narrative does not lead to collaboration or clarity or solutions. It actually leads to the opposite. And
Or
so
even
why?
understanding, or even mutual shared meaning of anything.
Correct. And so when I hear someone screaming loud and you can't trust them and blah blah blah, even if I agree with ideas that they are in support of, I'm not going to support that person because of the way that they're putting forth the ideas and because they're adding in the mistrust and fear. Because I refuse to support that part of it because that is a much bigger threat to well-being of myself and of the nation than one individual idea.
Well, and it's entirely disempowering, you
Oh yeah.
know, it's been effective, but like back to the those who are in those systems that aren't working are there because they match that system and they believe in it, and they actually think they're doing the right thing in their current mindset because they have a belief architecture that suggests things or people or both need to be controlled and within, and if not, terrible things happen and God
Mhm.
will not, or whatever it all is that sustains that need to continue in that system, even, and the other side doing a different complementary version of that, but still believing in the system when the
And in the
system
fight.
well, yeah, and it well, yeah, it's a version of war,
Hmm.
actually, with different details.
Hmm.
And the what we're observing now, the way that it helps me to be a witness to and a positive participant in what we're observing now, which seems particularly extreme or wobbly, or and that's unstable, and so that's contributing to the fear, is that what is there, it's the end of that system, and it's not going to be able to continue the way it is. It has to get to a tipping point of breakdown so that something else can emerge from that or through that or out of that.
Yes, and also I think consciousness is required for something different to emerge because if the consciousness is the same, it can break down and just,
Yeah.
you know, rebirth itself, pop back up in a different form, but with the same energy behind it.
Yeah.
It's I
And
tell.
that's happened over, recorded history. We could point to many versions of that,
Mhm.
of recreating with slightly different details, but essentially the same energy, the same consciousness, the same.
Mhm. Well, and that's why I'm uninterested in picking a side as things currently stand, because both sides are part of the same energy field.
Mhm. Mhm. There wouldn't be a side if there wasn't a, something sustaining, couldn't, it couldn't exist without the polarization of energy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there we are, but like, and so what it feels like to me in my life experience is that there's enough countermanding consciousness and energy flowing in the one humanity, you know, on earth, if you will, that suggests to me that we'll overcome this, because the strength of the higher level of like coexisting in peace and peaceful cooperation and individual expression of a life, of a soul, you know, who came to do whatever they are doing here, you know, and a respect and an honoring of that, of all of that variation. I mean, that's at some point, I mean, I think there has to be enough consciousness raising for the tipping point to kind of force the birth of the new way forward. But it's really what it feels like is going on, because there's just these huge waves that keep getting bigger. And there's a lot of evidence to point to. I guess if your attention is so focused on, there's a lot of people shifting their mindset, and they're, you know, orienting to the heart and not just the head. And there's just a lot of people popping, you know, growing.
That's
Evolving.
very true. And also, I think what I observe is still lacking is the discernment component. And I love that you said about kind of the head and heart consciousness, you know, because I think that's so valuable, and it has been lacking, and I do see and feel more of that. And also from my own experience with that, like it takes time to develop personal awareness of different aspects of self, and how to tune into and honor different voices within ourselves that guide us in one way or another, and kind of finding the midpoint of those things and deciding, oh, and what's influencing
Or
these
it's
things.
like, or being given like a peek beyond the veil or the curtain, like that there is a different way to, that there's a different way, you know, like we get so stuck in the defined ways, you know. I mean, there.
Yeah, a lot of people may not even have that an idea of that concept to consider. And even again, from my own experience, once you start to have that awareness and explore it, that's just the beginning. You know, you don't automatically have full understanding and grasp of all those aspects of life and of self, and it takes time. And so,
Well, especially since everything around you is reminding you of the previous take on things.
uh-huh. Yeah, yeah, it's very easy to kind of slip back into that.
And yet, in my experience, when I have been able to go beyond my own, you know, programming, my experience of that is undeniably undeniably true and powerful. So like it's not just they're not, in my experience, equal qualitatively by a long stretch of the imagination. So being stuck in a narrative and getting a peek at sovereign free will in my own life, you know, and being connected to the source of that and the power, the life force that is, you know, the miracle of me, you know, I'm like an alive being, one of 8 billion, all this life on our planet. And if we're not tuned into that, we lose a deep, deep, deep respect for what a miracle it is.
Mhm.
It is in its own, as a piece of evidence.
Mhm.
It's like a miracle has happened, like,
Sure.
and we're not, well, back
And-
to organized religions have removed the connection to that and said, oh no, something way outside yourself
Well,
is divine, but you are not, and therefore you must.
well, again, it's those institutions of control that are ultimately very people-based, are threatened by that personal sovereignty and that power. So, in the example of religion, what you sometimes see is, I mean, religion is about divinity and miracles and God and connection to something greater than you, which I think is a beautiful idea. And also, I think at times, when people are getting in touch with their own personal experience of that and power, there can be this sort of response that's sort of like, hey, 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 like, hold on there, you know, you like that's dangerous. You need to shut that door and just
Listen to me.
listen to what I have to say or follow these other instructions outside of yourself, kind of as you were saying, because even though that's what's sort of behind all of it, that's the idea, is to be connected to that. It's threatening to people who consciously or unconsciously want to control the life and behaviors and perspectives of others, and that type of empowerment is threatening, and so ultimately they want to squash it and control it.
But
And
yeah, because they don't have any, they would have no agency over that kind of power if people could connect to it.
well, correct. And it's not just, I mean, it's a dynamic. And
So I have a question. It's in why do we think that um why do we think that there was all this evolution towards away from, personal divine life force or whatever you want people call it, toward a much to such a much less rich version of living out a life's existence? Like, why was that? Why is that? Like, I don't know that we see, now I'm having all these thoughts, but like in the natural world, like in nature, there's a different consciousness there, but like it does the natural thing. And those beings that are human beings have this brain and mind ability to override things and create, it's like a double-edged sword almost, because we can create in a way that cancels our natural state. But I mean, I guess just sort of curious about why we've gone so far. Why was it possible to go this far? What was the power that was flowing that allowed those systems to come online the way that they did, and then grew and grew and spread?
yeah, I
Because
think that
ancient tribes
I think
lived differently.
I think that two things. I think that human beings are, I think of us as a divine experiment by God to begin with, which is like, what happens if I give these creatures the opportunity to create with their own free will, and choose whether or not to connect with me or try consciously or try to get back to me. I mean, I personally don't think we can disconnect ourselves entirely from God. You know, we're always a part of the universe, but we can definitely block ourselves off from kind of divine influence and information to the best of our ability using our mind. And so I think that human beings are a divine experiment in that way of like, what will we create if given the freedom to do that? And how might we find our way back to God through that process? Which I think is, you know, kind of almost like the arc of human experience. But to answer your other question, I think that it was a developmental phase for us to really develop our mental side. You know, we've become more mentally focused as a world and as a species, and have really done a lot of incredible things using our minds. But also, we became so hyper focused on use of the mind that we started to neglect other parts of ourselves, and thereby really limit ourselves. um you know, I think
Yep.
there's just a tipping point in nature. Anytime you over focus in one area and neglect another, it creates an imbalance, and over time it becomes more and more problematic. And so I think of sort of the mind body, or mind, you know, heart body kind of interaction in that way, that if you become too heavily only in one direction, it's
Which
a
creates
problem.
disease and,
Mhm.
like imbalance, right? And we
Yeah.
don't, and not even being present to that. And like there's an inner knowing about which, let's just say, the way we treat physical symptoms and what we understand about diseased states, and how the view and the explanation for those things is still so incredibly narrow and
Mhm.
compartmentalized and not holistic or
Yeah,
integrative, you know,
because it
unless,
comes from that mental consciousness, which is limited.
mhm, yeah.
You know.
Well, yeah, and right, right.
You know.
Which is a powerless place to be in relationship to that experience that many of us have over our lifetimes, like different things we deal with, and
Well,
not seeing it as a being our systems, all our energy systems being out of whack and out of balance.
yeah. Well, and what's worse is we don't realize that we can't disconnect ourselves fully. You know, even the most mental of people on the planet, meaning like they're very in their mind all the time. They don't they don't listen to signals from their body. They just ignore their emotions for the most part. Even those people are heavily influenced uh, by their emotions unconsciously. Um, and that's an even bigger problem, you know, because we can't turn off our human emotions. Um, and if we ignore and neglect them, they still direct and control our thoughts and behavior in many respects,
And
but
manifest all over the place.
just in an unconscious way. And then we're very susceptible to being misled, you know, and steered in certain directions by people who can tap into those unconscious emotions, and thereby kind of remotely steer the ship. And
Yeah,
then, you know, people are none the wiser what's happening.
yeah. And it's like it's said a lot, you know, in philosophy circles and everything, that if you look at across all of humanity's timelines, one of the things that has always been consistent, even in the middle of all this going sideways in our mind of, kind of understanding how it all fits together, is an innate search for God or for the divine, because that is so, you cannot disconnect from it, which is why partly why religions of the world and every other kind of spiritual practice has had the power, the capacity to harness that, because it's a core part of us to miss that if it's not alive in us or whatever,
Right.
search for meaning.
Uh-huh. Totally. Yeah.
Man and women search for meaning.
Yeah, it's powerful to tap into that, and that's those are
But,
two areas. What's that?
well, I was just going to say, I'm sure you've said the same. There's been a steady disengagement with formal religions, like they're all losing followers, and what's rising is people who are spiritually eclectic seekers, so they're not just going to another version or a more spiritual something or yoga or whatever. They're owning their own path, and instead of giving over their path to a system that's being measured. And so there's some evidence about an emerging tipping point around some of at least those structures, but they're all like, you can't, in my mind, you can't say that about spirituality or religion without also, it just all seems so entangled to me, like social structures, because a lot of our religions, our social structures are built around religious morals and beliefs. And we're founded often.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think it is built, so much of, past things and beliefs are built into our existing structures, um, which, yeah, problematic. I think people are challenging structures more, but even like going back to the political system, uh, people are kind of trying to challenge that, and have been in disagreement with it for a long time, but they haven't succeeded in changing it, and in fact, I don't think they're that close to succeeding in changing it, because what I see is people, the left, the right, but really, you're still playing the game. You're
Right.
you're right in there, kind of playing into the ongoing saga of playing people against each other. And so long as you choose a side in that game, you're complicit in that broken system,
Well,
which
and there's at
factor on.
least one other way to be in relationship to that, and that's just total resignation. I know a lot
Right,
of
which is
people who
also
are like,
complicit.
it's a powerless place too. Maybe fighting is almost slightly higher energetically than just like complete,
Well, it's true.
like, um,
Yeah, but we don't want to be in fight, flight, or freeze. Those are all trauma responses. You know, so that is the goal. Is like, how do we be active, conscious participants while not getting sucked in or not, towing the line. It's why I've often said, like, for my own personal barometer, one of my sort of warning signs internally for myself, for whether it's content or a institution or a person, where I feel like, oh, I should be cautious here, is when I feel like someone's trying to uh, pull me in, or
me, yeah.
they're trying to rile me up.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's, again, if it's something that I might agree with, if the energy of it is like, like,
Mm-hmm.
that's not where I'm trying to go. It's not how I'm trying to operate. because I don't think that brings out the clearest point of view. Um, and so, yeah, so I really try to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
uh,
I'd like to weave in, because I keep coming back to the Ugandan Olympic athlete who was set on fire by her partner. And I'll weave in the emergence of this feminine potential leader of our country, kind of almost whatever serendipitously ending up emerging inside of a cycle. It's just a cycle, so it's like a little dot. But so what many are also talking about in terms of balancing is the balance between the feminine and the masculine energies that we all carry inside of us, but also exist in life. And if you look at the ancient texts, all of them reference the masculine and the feminine, yin and yang kind of. It's a part of life. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that it, and so that's out of balance and has been not throughout all of human history, but certainly the human history we can relate to, recent history and today, and like whatever, variously across our planet now. So it also makes me think of the girls and women in Afghanistan who were given efficacy and had it taken all away. It's just it just hurts so much in my heart, and so does this, not this like senseless murder. And then here's Kamala Harris, who one of the things I've been surprised about, because she's part of the system, she's also got a life story, and but she made a conscious choice to come out the gate leading with a message of not just optimism and hope, but joy, which is a very high vibration energy, because joy is connected to our most ecstatic divine states. Like that's like where we find a lot, the possibility of peace, the possibility of progress, the possibility of equality, whatever, like, so that shocked me. And getting attacked for using that referential energy, I'll call it motion, energy, frequency, vibration, in the same conversation as an American political election. And the current dynamic we are observing is to just quash that fast, stamp it out, kill it, stop it, do not allow it. Do not allow this beautiful woman who is a powerful runner and, ascended to that level of accomplishment and expression and manifestation, just like kill it, is not because she was an athlete, but because she was a woman. So we're also dancing with that shift right now in a lot of places across the world. And Taliban or not, there will come a day when that system won't last either. Maybe not too soon for me to see it, but I would like to think.
Yeah, I've thought about that a bit too. Yeah, I think a quick thought on Kamala Harris and all that. I mean, I think anytime underrepresented people get into positions of power, it generally then it's a net positive. So in this case, like a woman has never been president of the United States. She's also a woman of color. You mentioned that she's sort of trying to come with a joy vibration, which is also kind of new, newish to
They
in that
attack her for
domain.
smiling and laughing.
Um, well, yeah, I mean, when you said about the attacking, it's like um, there's absolutely nothing she could do or not do that would lead to her not being attacked. That's the nature of our public discourse, which is so disappointing to me. Um,
And
but so
one
I do think about it in terms of the net positive, but I also like you mentioned her being part of the system, which is something I also clearly see. And greater than that net positive of having a woman or woman of color, or a person representing joy in a position of power like that would be to have somebody who is not part of the system. If that was an option, that would so far above and away be my preference and would have a much more powerful impact. Unfortunately, that's not the case at the moment, but I just wanted to highlight that and mention it that I would choose like a straight white man who I perceived as being not part of that system over a woman of color, even though I see the need for more diverse representation and perspective there, and I really value that too. I see much more power and potency in what someone is aligned with uh, energetically. So that's just sort of my own
Well, here's
take
what
on.
I say to that. I think I disagree on some fronts. So number one, she could never be in a position to aspire to lead our country had she not been part of this current system. And it's like when Obama came out, I mean, him even coming out with the politics of hope, the audacity of hope. It was so powerful. You never heard a politician speak from
Yes,
that inspired place.
but the difference is he was part of the system, but he was tuned into an energy beyond the system. I don't sense that with her.
Well, okay. I mean, we'll see. But like to your point, um, I think it was I don't experience her as quite as purely powerful as Barack Obama was, but he also is, and I mean when he ran for president, but like he was also part of the system, or he would never have been able to do what he so like. And I do think it shows demonstrates to me courage and boldness. I mean, she's just a person, right? I don't know what her belief system is underneath all the life story. You know, she almost reminds me a little bit of my city manager, Suja Lowenthal, who was Indian from India, came here at 6 with it, etc. And she's very good, honest, well-meaning, hardworking, very effective. But her underbelly is a little covered up. Her I think she's played inside the system she had to play with.
You know what's interesting is I actually perceive Trump as outside of the traditional political system, but the energy that underlies him is extremely problematic from my perspective.
Well,
It's not aligned with the current political system, but it's not aligned with the highest well-being of the American people or really anyone but.
well, and it's also I know we've talked about this, but I think a lot of people don't talk about this necessarily, that his example and what it represents is just a mirror, a reflection of what exists. Like he's just this like out front character playing like a role in the unfolding play of our country, but
And it's his greatest strength.
he couldn't be
Is
successful.
I've noticed, and I've heard people speak to it, his style is he goes out and he kind of just puts little things. He just tests the waters all the time, and he sees what gets the reaction, and then he goes with it. And so he's really just feeling his way through what's the emotional undercurrent of the American people. What's there um, to work with, and he's very good at following the passions of the people who he's speaking to. And
Or
um,
I
but
would say differently. He's been good at and effective at not. I think of passion as a little more pure than, you know, fear-based beliefs mindset. Because like has tapped into that when his whole life he wasn't necessarily a character of that.
well, in that moment, when I say passion, I just mean strong emotion.
Yeah.
Um,
But
he,
he couldn't do it if it didn't, he couldn't capitalize on it if it wasn't existing in all of those followers.
well, right, like you said, I mean, he's a mirror, and he gives people back what they want to hear, what they want to see, and they like how that feels. Um, and there's people are hungry for that, you know,
What
and
is that what they're hungry for, or they just don't know what their hunger is?
well, they know that what's being placed in front of their face is false, and they want something reflected back to them that feels real. And even if it's as simple and superficial as some kind of like ego based or emotional thing, that still is more satisfying than someone being like, everything's fine. You're just like, I guess that's not the message, everything's fine, but like, there's just this sense, and has been for a long time. Like, if you think about the Al Gore, George Bush, like era of politics in my mind, it just feels so disconnected from everyday people. And
Or just
and and
authenticity.
and Trump's um tapping into and reflecting back people's emotions, it makes them feel seen, even however much it makes them feel seen in a way they haven't felt seen in a long time. And that's enough
And
for a lot of people. And
yeah,
once they're hooked like that, he can say anything and people will believe it.
well, and being seen in your misery, it wait, this is coming to me like interestingly, like being seen in your misery is like eating a piece of candy, because if you are disconnected and like it's a little hit that gives you some satisfaction, but
Mm-hmm.
it feeds a beast, which is one of disconnection and lack of um love,
Mm-hmm.
orientation of love toward yourself and others and the all. So it's sort of validating, and people have strong reactions. Oh, look, I made balloons happen. Validating, which is a powerful experience and hard to not lean into. But being so, but where does it leave you? It leaves you stuck.
But people don't think that far ahead.
Of course.
I mean, look at what drives our society. I mean, it's full of gratification. That's most people are just like, I just want the next thing that takes the pain away, makes me feel a little better. I want the next show. I want the next candy. I want the next drink. I want the next whatever.
Yeah, we're really out there on a limb
You know,
with
and that's why
now it's like
I
this.
mean, I mean, yeah, or the phone. But I mean, he almost, I think he learned it probably also in working in entertainment, you know? Yeah, like people crave relief from their suffering. And so he's like entertaining, but he's taking it a step further, which is he's entertaining and validating. And it's like people are hungry for that and they don't think beyond, whether, it's like someone telling you, like, I don't know, what came to mind is um, like in a really early part of a relationship or a new person that you meet, and it's like, they're like, have you ever heard like the pop songs? It's like, tell me you love me, even if you don't believe it. It's like people don't even care if it's true. They just want to pretend it's true
Yeah, but
for the
but
moment.
but they certainly would feel the difference between a being lied to and being authentically.
Yeah, but how many people, when they're told by a prospective partner, oh, you're so, blah, 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 because it's what they want to hear, they they overlook the red flags. A lot of people fall into that trap. And I think the American people as a whole do it because it's hard when that's what when all you want is to be validated and seen. When someone does it, it's so easy you don't want to question their motives. You just like, that's what I wanted. Like, I don't want to, I don't want this feeling to go away.
Well,
So
that it just brings up something that's been on my mind kind of a lot lately too, which is, kind of highlighted in high relief during the election and what voters are seem to be drawn and moved by in their decision to vote is how much it's all about the price I pay for milk or something. And it's so not or ever or even a little bit about the future of the whole, the all. It's not
mhm,
about all of us. It's about me.
mhm, yes.
So it's just so still stuck in ego. It's like really, there's like all this stuff going on in the world, and there's wars, and there's climate stuff, and there's just something in Uganda that it's like, but you know what? I really don't care about that at all. All I care about is my feeling that milk or gas is too expensive, which may or may not even be completely true. You're being told it is to an
Right, but
extent.
it's a level of consciousness thing, right? Well, like you're speaking to, which is just like, it's
I don't.
about me, what's going to make me the most happy right now, like in the short term, you
Yeah.
know,
So how did we get there? Like, I mean, even America was founded on an idea
Be-
of
because
freedom
we
for
have
all people and diversity. It's like,
because we have artificial scarcity created by uh, um, inequitable, like, wealth distribution and systems that reinforce it.
yeah, like we veered far off. Like, we went totally sideways.
Yeah, I
It,
mean,
it,
look,
but we've gone back and forth. I mean, it's not just one thing. It's like back to, I want to make sure, and I know time is getting short, but driving me nuts lately is a lack of discernment. Like their decision and their thinking is so shallow.
mhm,
And there's no, I'm pretty sure we've talked about this, but there's no digging below to the deeper levels of how to understand any of it.
mhm,
It's just like beep, I
yeah,
guess we've been trained, and we're distractible. And now
mhm.
we're so distractible, and we're so full of distraction that
Well, and
we have time and space to concentrate.
look how shallow the public discourse is. Look how shallow the media discourse is.
Completely.
It keeps people on that level of consciousness, But it also keeps them hooked in because it's sensationalized and people can't, pull their eyes away from it. Um, and yeah, I just think of it as like that.
Mm.
I've shared this with you before, but kind of like that gossipy person at at the school or at the job or at the group. Who are like, oh, did you hear this? Do you know what happened to so and so? And after a few times, when you kind of catch on to it, it's like
It's toxic.
I don't even care what that person has to say anymore because the intention behind it is harmful. And so I don't want to hear anything that they have to say along those lines. It doesn't mean like I would never speak to that person again, but I don't want to hear them talk about
Well, and they
hear
don't
them
even
gossip.
know, it makes them feel a little powerful, which, and it's a deflection from how they feel about themselves, or else they wouldn't be so
Mhm.
oriented.
Yeah,
Uh,
and it stokes emotion.
yeah. Yeah, it's like a little crack pipe hit.
Mhm.
Um, well, oh, I know what the last thing that popped in was kind of about the now, and it certainly was during COVID because I felt it on a really upfront, being kind of in a position of power over people's lives and freedom in their community.
Mhm.
And but it was underneath that as well, was like the stable ground people thought was there was all of a sudden removed. So, and I think that's the case now with more details, like just like everything seems to be kind of loose and crumbling,
Mhm.
and that makes people feel really unsafe. So they're more desperate to grasp at things. Um, and yet, if there's something to be thankful for in the breakdowns, it's that we can't stay where we have been sort of comfortable existing, because we're going to have to face, you can't have bigger light without a big dark providing that contrast. Like, it doesn't work that way. It seems like it has to,
Yeah,
has it
that's
we
true.
if Trump got elected, for example, it would forever shift powerfully on a lot of different levels. But if you see it as like a chess move in the evolution of this country, let's just say it's this country, or humanity as a whole on some level as well, is um, um, there will be in all kinds of reactions, some more healthy than others, but some, there would be also like a, this cannot stand, especially for the people who are like connected and operating from a higher level of connection and higher level of consciousness, and really aspire to things that would benefit the all and
Mhm.
be healthy for the whole. um so I mean, we're gonna have to, it's still exciting for me to be one who can maybe be in a position to witness and participate in a big undulation. I mean, it's not the only one, there's been other ones, but there's definitely a lot of undulations right
Yeah.
now. And we are the people, we're always all are the people we've been waiting for. I mean, people are picking up and doing their own thing, and they're disengaging from all of this. They're building their own communities, they're living, they're determining their own professional paths with their own power, and which is enabled by things like technology, but also a mindset of, I don't have to play the game like that.
Mhm. Yeah,
Like,
but we need those people in positions of power too.
Do we? How
Yeah.
much government do we need if we could ascend our level of consciousness and mutual
Well, we
cooperation?
don't need a lot of government, but the government that we have, it needs to be guided by people who are invested in the common good. And that's not what we have. I would love to have it be I'm a small government kind of, you know, person. I think personal freedom is great. It's wonderful, but the government that we do have and the leadership that we do have needs to be the right people. And the right people are the ones who clearly have the interest of, you know, um,
Do you think that could
major-
ever happen within the current arrangement?
uh,
It's sort of like moving the Titanic, you know?
I mean, it's not impossible, but it's just so entrenched. Um, like I think Bernie's kind of that ilk with his limitations. I thought AOC kind of came in with a fresh energy that I really liked, but then you know, I think she kind of became part of the system too, and she's a kind of just a back and forth, in the argument. And I want to see some transcendence of the back and forth nature of politics. I'm so tired of stupid sound bites of congressmen and women name calling. Like, are you fucking kidding me that these people are the elected leaders of our country and they're like behaving in a way that would be unacceptable in an elementary school class?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah, it's really,
it's a joke.
it's such a joke, absurd, such an absurd
And it's so, yeah,
reality. But
and it's so shockingly unimpressive. And
yeah, I know. I mean, the conversations really, or the communication, if you could call it that, is so ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. But
right,
but know that I feel like I also know that because of the way that system grew and evolved, certain types of personalities were drawn in because they matched that. And that's why we don't have different people there, because if you're very different, like, quite honestly, really, do you want to run for office? Because it would be stifling. I can tell you from personal experience, it's like walking in with my voice and feeling like the experience mirrored back to me is like, I'm just going,
yeah. Well,
there's
and that speaks
no
to
land.
it speaks to the level of consciousness, but also the ratio of people who are at that level of consciousness. It's kind of like a theory that I have when it comes to therapy groups and just groups in general, which is like you have to have a certain ratio of healthy to unhealthy people, or of conscious to unconscious people, because if it's dominated by unconsciousness, the consciousness is going to have a hard time being having like being seen or influencing. It's like, um and
Well, we're in
I
some
see
kind of
that in
vintage.
politics.
Yeah, and I think that historically we've had more balance than we have recently, and you see mass exodus of the people who have walked away
Historically, we've
because
had values
they
and
can't stand
decency.
the quality of the conversation anymore. They're just
Well, to me, and I'm gonna come full circle here and tie this to capitalism, but to me, it's sort of this deterioration and decline of values, where a hyper-capitalistic society, it's increasingly
consuming.
acceptable to bend the rules, to compromise your ethics, to cut corners, to take advantage of others to get ahead, and all that we celebrate is the success of it. And then you get people in power who are of that same that same mindset. So I think that there was an unspoken built-in concept of values before in past generations of like certain lines you don't cross of like decency. Like when John McCain was in that town hall debate and the lady was like, Obama wasn't born here, he's not a citizen, and he like corrected her, even though, that's not like maybe what was ideal for his campaign, but it was like the decent thing to do, right? Um, and yeah, and then you have a Donald Trump come along and disrespect and dishonor a veteran like John McCain by saying he's a disappointment because he got captured and was a POW, and he likes
Ugh,
soldiers who don't get captured.
yeah.
And like
It's like
the
a,
fact that the country was not completely outraged and ousted him on that basis just speaks to what we value and what we're focused on at any given moment. And so I think it's moved increasingly in that direction. And last thing I'll say is you see that also in Mitt Romney, and even I never would have thought Dick Cheney, right? Who are saying, hey, like, um, there are much more important things here at stake than just politics. And they're speaking to, as I like to, the character of Donald Trump, which is like, I might agree more on politics with him than I do with Kamala, but I'm so concerned about his character that I cannot and will not support him. And that's like a pretty big shift from how things have traditionally been done in politics, but it's unfortunately really widely acceptable to overlook character, and just focus on, I don't know.
but yeah,
No,
they've been bullied out basically, and I do think that consumerism and that in that gross inequitable distribution of wealth and the society built on like the importance of consumerism and all that stuff. Because what's happened is over time, the people who are in those power positions who have that level of consciousness have purchased politicians to place in governments.
correct.
And that's what Bernie and others,
Rail against, yeah.
all rail against. And therefore you get what you get, which is
More of that.
more of that, people who are friendly to that.
Yes,
Yeah.
agree. All right, so I need to wrap.
All right. What's your weekend got plans?
Getting ready to go get a haircut.
Nice.
You want to end the recording?
Sure.